I woke up to a racket of metal banging and people shouting right outside my window. I figured it was just the garbage truck showing up way too dang early, but as I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and took a peek through the blinds, I almost had a heart attack. My backyard, the one I take pride in, that's always green and perfect, had been invaded, plain and simple. There were white folding chairs all lined up neat as you please, and some kind of arch covered in flowers standing at the far end. A whole crew of folks was running around setting up what looked like a real fancy wedding ceremony. I blinked, thinking I was still dreaming or something. But nope, this was real. This was actually happening. And then I saw her. Karen, the self-appointed queen bee of the neighborhood, standing smack dab in the middle of my yard, barking orders like she owned the whole damn place. I yanked on a hoodie, stormed out the back door, and marched right up to her. Karen, what the H*** is going on here? I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through all the chatter of those workers. Karen turned around with that infuriating, smug little smile of hers. Oh, Jake, you're finally up. We were starting to worry you were gonna sleep through the whole thing. The whole what? This is my yard. Why is there a wedding set up here? Karen just laughed and waved her hand like it was no big deal. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just for the day. My daughter's wedding, remember? My eyes started twitching like crazy. No, I don't remember, because nobody ever asked me about it. Karen sighed like I was some kid throwing a fit. Jake, we sent out notices weeks ago. This is a community event. You should feel honored that we chose your place for such an important day. I looked around the yard again, and my blood pressure went through the roof. Some DJ was setting up speakers right next to my fence. A catering van had pulled right into my driveway. And was that a portable bathroom they were wheeling into my front yard? I don't care what notices you sent. I never agreed to this. Get all this stuff out of my yard, and get it out now. Karen's face hardened, and that fake smile of hers turned mean. Oh, Jake, you're making this difficult. Do you really want to be the only person in the whole neighborhood who ruins my daughter's special day? I clenched my fists. I don't give a damn about your daughter's special day. This is trespassing. You have no right to do this. Karen held up a hand to shut me up. Oh, but I do. According to HOA regulations, community events can be hosted in any available space deemed suitable by the board. And guess what? We deemed your yard suitable. My stomach twisted into knots. I knew Karen and her HOA buddies had been making up ridiculous rules for years. But this was a whole new level of crazy. You can't just... Oh, but we can! Karen interrupted, all sweet as pie. And unless you'd like to rack up some rather hefty fines for, let's see, an unsightly lawn, unauthorized external modifications, and parking violations. My jaw tightened. She was threatening me. She had already decided this was happening, and those fake fines were just her way of twisting my arm until I gave in. I needed to take a deep breath. I needed to think. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. The wedding was set to kick off in less than 6 hours, and my yard was already looking more like a wedding venue than, well, my yard. The caterers were hauling out trays of food, the florist was draping flowers over every single thing, and a bunch of giggling bridesmaids were taking selfies next to my koi pond. I stormed back inside and slammed the door behind me, my brain spinning. There had to be a way to stop this. If Karen wanted a fight, she was gonna get one. I grabbed my phone, trying to figure out my options. Calling the cops? Nah, Karen had made sure to wrap this whole thing up in enough HOA bull ***** to make it look official. I needed something faster. Something that would ruin that wedding before it even got started. Then, as I stared out the window at those pristine white tablecloths and fancy floral arrangements, a thought popped into my head. A wicked, brilliant thought. See, my property had this old underground sprinkler system. I never used it because the water that came out was just plain disgusting. Rusty, murky, and smelling like dirt and iron. It was left over from the old plumbing system that got replaced years ago, but the pipes were still there, just waiting. A slow grin crept across my face. Karen wanted a wedding in my yard? Fine. She was gonna get exactly what she asked for. I didn't waste any time. I headed out to the garage, grabbed my toolbox, and got to work. If everything went according to plan, this wedding was about to turn into the biggest disaster this neighborhood had ever seen. I paced back and forth in my kitchen, holding onto my coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping me from losing it. I'd put up with years of Karen's and her HOA cronies' nonsense, but this was a whole new level of crazy. She had turned my backyard into a dang wedding venue without even asking me. And the worst part was, she knew how to work the system to get away with it. I had to be smart about this. I had to hit her back in a way that would make sure she never tried pulling something like this again. The sound of people laughing outside made my blood boil. I peeked through the blinds and watched a bunch of bridesmaids posing in front of that arch they set up near my fence. Some of them even had the nerve to wave at me, like they didn't even know I hadn't agreed to any of this. The caterers were setting up tables with expensive-looking plates, and some DJ was testing out his sound system near the porch. My yard looked like something out of a dang bridal magazine. And yet, I was the only person involved who hadn't been asked about it. My phone buzzed. It was Tom, one of the only reasonable folks in the neighborhood. "Jake." Tom sighed as soon as I picked up. "I heard what's happening. Man, I don't even know what to say. You could start by telling me how Karen thinks she can get away with this." I snapped. Tom hesitated. "Look, you know how she is. She twisted the HOA rules just enough to make it look. She's within her rights. She bulldozed the board into approving this. And if you try to fight it, she'll probably hit you with so many made-up violations, you won't know which way is up." I rubbed my temples, 'cause I already knew all that. Then I need to do something she can't argue with. Something that's legal, but something that'll completely ruin this whole thing. There was a pause on the other end before Tom spoke again, his voice lowered. "You didn't hear this from me, but I found out something interesting. Karen didn't just pick your yard 'cause she thought it was pretty. She picked it 'cause she spent the HOA's event fund on herself. There was supposed to be a real venue, but she blew the budget on personal stuff. So, she made up some HOA crap to force you into this." I felt my grip on the phone tighten. Of course, she did. The level of entitlement was unbelievable. But now I had a way in. Karen wasn't just being a total tyrant, she was covering up her own mistakes. "Thanks for telling me," I muttered. "Now I just gotta make sure this wedding doesn't go off without a hitch." I ended the call and turned back to the window. My eyes locked on the sprinkler system controls in the garage. That nasty old water had been sitting in those underground pipes for years. One flick of a switch and my whole yard would turn into a swamp of rusty, muddy chaos. But I had to time it just right. If I did it too early, Karen would find a way to fix it. I had to wait until just the perfect moment. When everything was set up, when all the guests were settled in, when the bride was about to walk down the aisle. I had to make sure this was a disaster Karen would never forget. As I was plotting, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a guy in a tuxedo standing there, looking a little nervous. "Hey, you must be Jake," the guy said. "I'm David. I'm the groom." I narrowed my eyes. "You're the guy marrying Karen's daughter?" David scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, look, I just wanted to say, I had no idea she was doing all this. I thought we had a real venue booked. I didn't even know this was someone's private property until this morning." I studied him for a second. He seemed genuine. "So you're saying Karen lied to everyone?" David let out a long breath. "I'm saying I wouldn't put it past her. She's been controlling every single detail of this whole wedding. Stephanie, my fiancée, wanted something small. But Karen turned it into this. And now I'm standing in a stranger's doorway, apologizing for something I didn't even do." I crossed my arms. "You do realize you're about to marry into this, right?" David gave a dry laugh. "Trust me, I've been having second thoughts." He ran a hand down his face. "I just wanted to say I get why you're mad. If I were you, I'd be totally losing my mind. I sighed. As much as I wanted to hate everyone involved in this, I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for the guy. Well, you're not wrong. I glanced past David and saw Karen on the other side of the yard, directing more vendors like a dictator running her own little country. My frustration flared up all over again. Look, man, I appreciate you coming over here. But this wedding is a total joke. And I'm not just gonna sit back and let her walk all over me. David nodded. Fair enough. Whatever you're about to do, maybe don't completely wreck the whole wedding. Stephanie doesn't deserve that. I thought about that for a second, then shrugged. No promises. David sighed, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and walked back toward the chaos. I shut the door and checked the time. 2 hours until the ceremony started. That gave me just enough time to put the final touches on my plan. I grabbed my toolbox and went back out to the garage, making sure everything was ready. I wasn't gonna flood the yard just yet. Nah, I was gonna wait. I was gonna let them all think everything was going smooth as butter. Then, right when Karen thought she had won, I was gonna make sure this wedding went down as the single worst event in HOA history. The sun was shining, the guests were showing up, and the wedding was coming together exactly the way Karen had imagined it. Except for one small detail. The guy who actually owned the yard was watching from his window, just waiting for the right moment to turn this picture-perfect event into a dang nightmare. I sipped my coffee, my heart pounding with anticipation. I checked everything twice. The rusted sprinkler system was good to go, the water was primed in those underground pipes, and the second Karen felt like she was on top of the world, I was gonna flip that switch. Outside, laughter and chatter filled the air. The groom's side of the family was getting seated, making polite conversation, completely clueless about the disaster that was coming. The bride's side was another story. They were loud, obnoxious, and almost as entitled as Karen herself. A group of middle-aged women in expensive dresses complained about the humidity, fanning themselves dramatically. A few kids ran around wild, stomping through my flower beds while their parents just ignored them. My fists clenched when I spotted Karen at the front of the yard, greeting people like she was the queen of some fancy royal party. She was smiling, laughing, acting like she owned the whole neighborhood. She hadn't even glanced at my house, probably thinking she'd already won. It was almost funny how easily she thought she could get away with this. The music started up. The DJ, set up near the fence, cranked up some soft, romantic tune as the procession began. The bridesmaids made their way down the makeshift aisle, each one stepping carefully to avoid the uneven spots in the yard. The audience watched, their faces all warm and sentimental. Everything was going just perfect. My hand hovered over the switch. Not yet. I had to time this just right. Karen was standing near the front, beaming with pride. Her daughter, Stephanie, was about to make her grand entrance. The guests stood up, turning their heads, waiting. The guests stood up, turning their heads, all excited and waiting. The music got louder. This was it. I flipped the switch. It started out quiet, just a little gurgling noise. At first, nobody even noticed. Then, all of a sudden, with a hiss, those underground pipes let loose years' worth of trapped, nasty water. The sprinklers popped to life, spraying dark, murky liquid everywhere. The folks in the first few rows got nailed right away, screaming as their fancy clothes were soaked in brown, nasty crud. The water gushed out of the ground in crazy sprays, covering the perfectly set up chairs, those clean white tablecloths, and that huge wedding cake. All hell broke loose. The DJ's speakers sparked and died as water splashed all over the equipment. The bridesmaids screamed, grabbing their dresses and scrambling to get out of the way of the dirty water. Older folks stumbled back, slipping in the mud that was forming fast. That clean white aisle was now a swamp, and the pretty flower petals turned into a soggy mess. And then there was the bride. Stephanie stepped into the yard, ready for her big moment, only to find total chaos. Her white dress, which had been clean and sparkling, got ruined the second she stepped into a puddle of sludge. She yelled, lifting up the fabric, but it was too late. The bottom of her gown was stained beyond saving, the lace soaked in rust-colored water. I stood at my window, watching the whole thing go down, and I couldn't help but feel satisfied. But the real show was just getting started. Karen's face went from pure joy to total horror. She stormed toward the sprinkler system, slipping on the wet grass and barely catching herself. She spun around, her face red with rage, and looked around the yard until she saw my house. I stepped out onto my back porch, crossing my arms as Karen stomped toward me, mud flying off her heels. "You did this!" she screamed, pointing a shaky finger at me. I just shrugged. "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Sounds like a plumbing problem to me. Maybe you should have booked a real venue instead of stealing someone's backyard." Karen's hands curled into fists. "You ruined my daughter's wedding!" I raised an eyebrow. "Did I? 'Cause last time I checked, you never asked if you could use my yard in the first place." Stephanie, now close to crying, turned to her mom. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Karen started stammering, glancing at the guests who were now whispering to each other. Some of them had pulled out their phones, recording the chaos, eager to catch all the drama. I smirked. "Oh, you didn't tell them? You didn't tell your daughter that this wasn't actually a venue? That you didn't even bother to book a real place because you spent the HOA money on yourself?" The crowd gasped. Karen's face went white. Stephanie's face changed from heartbreak to anger. "You told me everything was taken care of. You said we had a beautiful outdoor venue booked." Karen stammered. "Sweetie, You lied to me?" Stephanie's voice cracked. "You used someone's private property? You didn't even ask him?" By now, the groom's family was slowly backing away from the bride's side, looking totally disgusted. David, the groom, stepped forward, shaking his head. "Wow, this just keeps getting worse." He turned to Stephanie. "You knew your mom was controlling, but this? This is just plain crazy." Stephanie's lips started to quiver. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." David let out a sharp breath and rubbed his head. "I need to think. I need a minute." He turned and walked off, leaving Stephanie standing there all alone with her ruined dress. Karen, seeing everything falling apart, tried to take charge again. "All right, everyone, just calm down. We can fix this. We'll just move the wedding inside." I chuckled. "Inside? You mean into my house? That's a good one. Now get off my property before I call the cops." Karen's eyes burned with anger, but she didn't have a choice. She turned, trying to save whatever she could, but it was no use. The guests were already leaving, whispering to each other about what a mess everything was. I watched, feeling pretty good, as the wedding fell apart right in front of Karen's eyes. The fancy decorations were ruined, the guests were furious, and worst of all for her, her secret about the HOA funds was now out in the open. As the last few guests walked away, Karen shot me one last dirty look. "You'll pay for this." I just smiled. "I think you already have." With that, I turned around and went back into my house, leaving Karen standing in the muddy mess of what was supposed to be her perfect day. Karen stood in the middle of my backyard, her once clean dress covered in mud, her hair all frizzy from the damp air. The wedding guests had mostly scattered, some helping each other to their cars, others just busy gossiping about what had happened. The expensive decorations, the flowers, the white chairs, everything was soaked, stained, or sinking into the mud and water that now covered the lawn. The cake had fallen apart from the water, its once fancy design now looking like a melted pile of sugar and regret. I leaned against my back porch railing, watching as Karen frantically tried to save what was left. She was yelling orders at the few vendors who were still there, but nobody was listening. The florists were packing up what little they could salvage. The DJ was shaking his head at his ruined equipment, and the caterers were arguing over who was gonna pay for the whole disaster. Stephanie, still standing in her ruined wedding dress, was shaking with anger. Her mascara was smeared, her hair was a mess from getting wet, and her once beautiful dress was completely ruined. She glared at her mother, her voice cracking as she demanded answers. You lied to me. You told me everything was planned, that it was a proper venue. You said it was all taken care of. Karen turned to her, trying to force a smile like she could somehow fix this with. Sweetie, we can still. No, Mom, we can't. Stephanie snapped. The wedding is over. It's ruined. And it's all because you couldn't just do things the right way. David, the groom, had mostly stayed quiet through all the craziness, but now he took a deep breath and stepped forward, shaking his head. You know, Stephanie, I was trying to ignore the red flags. Your mom controlling everything. The way she treated people like they were just there to serve her. The way you always made excuses for her. But this, he gestured to the swamp that was once my backyard. This is just insane. I don't think I can do this anymore. Stephanie's eyes went wide. What are you saying? David sighed. I'm saying this isn't just a wedding disaster. This is a sneak peek at the rest of my life. And I don't want to spend it cleaning up after your mom's messes. Stephanie gasped, and tears started welling up. You're breaking up with me? At our wedding? David ran a hand through his wet hair. What wedding? There's nothing left. And honestly, I think this is a sign. I don't want to be part of this family. The few guests who were still around gasped out loud. And Karen's face went white. David, you don't mean that. This is just the stress talking. We can fix this. David shook his head. No, Karen. I think you and I both know this isn't just about today. I can't marry into this. With that, he turned and walked off, leaving Stephanie standing there, frozen, with her mouth just opening and closing as she tried to take in what had happened. The guests awkwardly shuffled around, not sure whether they should say something or just quietly disappear. Tom, the only half-decent HOA member I ever knew, stepped forward, scratching the back of his neck. Look, Karen, I think we need to talk. Karen spun around, her patience completely gone. Not now, Tom. Yeah, actually now. Tom insisted. I got a call earlier from a few of the other HOA members. Seems like word's getting around that you didn't actually have permission to do, well, any of this. And there's talk that you used HOA funds for personal stuff. Is that true? Karen's face twisted. Of course not. That's ridiculous. Tom crossed his arms. Well, then I guess you wouldn't mind if we did a full audit? Karen's face twitched. That? Yeah, Tom said slowly. I think it is. The whispers in the crowd got louder, and Karen's face darkened. She turned to me, her eyes full of hate. This is your fault. I laughed. Oh no, Karen, this is all you. You did this to yourself. Karen took a deep breath, trying to keep it together. You think you've won, don't you? I shrugged. I think I'm finally getting my yard back. And I think you're about to have a lot more to worry about than me. The first police car pulled up just as the last guests were leaving. One of the vendors must have called them about the unpaid bills. And I watched with amusement as Karen's face went from anger to sheer panic. Stephanie had finally stopped crying, her makeup completely ruined, and she just slumped her shoulders in defeat. I can't believe this, she muttered. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered that she'd stood by and let her mother walk all over people for years. Karen stiffened as the officers walked toward her. Good evening, officers. I don't know what this is about, but I assure you. One of them held up his hand. We've received reports about an unauthorized event on private property and possible fraudulent use of HOA funds. We need to ask you a few questions. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. I grinned. This was better than I could have ever planned. Tom walked over to me, shaking his head and chuckling. Man, I gotta say, that was something else. I sighed, looking at what was left of my yard. Yeah, well, I think I'm gonna be dealing with this mess for a while. Tom patted my shoulder. Hey, at least you won. I smirked. Yeah, I did. Karen, now red-faced and flustered, was led toward the police car as the questioning began. Her voice was sharp and defensive, But nobody was listening anymore. The guests were gone. The wedding was ruined. The HOA was turning against her. I leaned against my porch railing, watching as Karen's empire crumbled before my eyes. This was the best day ever. The next morning, I stood in my backyard, looking at the wreckage of the biggest disaster in neighborhood history. The muddy water had mostly dried, leaving brown stains on the grass and ruined decorations scattered all over the lawn. A few wilted flowers were still hanging onto the wedding arch, which was now leaning all crooked like a relic from some war. Pieces of broken plates and soggy napkins were all over the ground, the remains of a celebration that never actually happened. The wedding was over. The HOA was a mess. And Karen? She was nowhere to be seen. I sipped my coffee, enjoying the silence. For the first time in years, there was no HOA threat hanging over my head. No Karen glaring at me from across the street. No more of those ridiculous fines showing up in my mailbox. The wedding had not only exposed Karen's corruption, but it had also finally given the whole neighborhood the push it needed to turn against her. No one felt sorry for her after the show she put on. And after the cops started asking questions, it was clear that her time was finally up. I chuckled, thinking about the moment Karen realized she was losing control. The way her face twisted up in horror when that police car showed up. The pure panic in her voice as she tried to smooth things over. But you can't smooth over a full-blown fraud investigation. The other HOA board members were already backing away from her, making sure to tell everyone that they had no idea she was messing with the funds. Tom promised me that a full audit was coming, and it wasn't looking good for Karen. The best part? The HOA had called an emergency meeting to talk about maybe just shutting the whole thing down. After years of putting up with Karen's ridiculous rules and petty fines, the homeowners had finally had enough. With the scandal going on and Karen's iron grip on the board broken, people were starting to realize they didn't actually need an HOA. The whole system had just been Karen's personal tool for bossing people around. And now that she was gone, it was only a matter of time before the whole thing fell apart. I walked over to my fence and looked across the street at Karen's house. The curtains were closed, and the front yard was eerily quiet. Rumors were already going around that she was planning to sell her house and leave town before the audit could catch up with her. I wouldn't be surprised. Karen was a lot of things, but she wasn't the type to stick around and face the music. As I turned back toward my house, I saw someone standing in my driveway. It was David, the almost groom, with his hands in his pockets, looking tired but surprisingly calm. I nodded at him. "Didn't think I'd see you around here again." David gave a short laugh. "Yeah, well, I guess I needed some closure." He looked around the yard, shaking his head. "Man, this place got wrecked." I smirked. "You should have seen it last night. The mosquitoes were having a party. I think one of them even carried off a bridesmaid." David snorted. "Honestly, I don't know whether to thank you or be mad at you. You ruined the wedding, but you might have saved my life." I raised an eyebrow. "So, it's officially over?" David nodded. "Stephanie tried to call me this morning, but I think we both know it wouldn't work out. Last night was a wake-up call. Her mom has controlled every part of her life. And if I had gone through with that wedding, I would have been stuck dealing with Karen for the rest of my life. I don't think I could have survived that." I chuckled. "Probably not. She'd have HOA rules for your marriage. Section 5B, husband must agree with wife's mother at all times or be fined accordingly." David laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, exactly." He hesitated, then looked at me more seriously. "I know you didn't do what you did for me, but thanks. I think you saved a lot of people from a—" I shrugged. "I just wanted my yard back. Everything else was just a bonus." David nodded, looking thoughtful. "So, what happens now? With Karen?" I smirked. "Oh, I think she's done. The HOA is falling apart, the board's turning on her, and she's got the cops breathing down her neck. If she doesn't skip town, she's gonna be in a world of trouble." David let out a breath. "Good. She deserves it." He paused, then grinned at me. So, what's next for you? Gonna start renting out the yard for real weddings? I laughed. Yeah, right. I think I've had enough of that for one lifetime. David clapped me on the shoulder. Well, if you ever change your mind, maybe think about charging next time. I smirked as David walked off, shaking his head. As big of a mess as the whole thing had been, it felt good knowing that I wasn't the only one who had come out on top. Later that evening, as the sun started to go down, I sat on my porch, enjoying the quiet of the neighborhood. It was funny how it all worked out. After all the chaos, all the fighting, everything Karen had done to make my life miserable, it had all crashed down in one night. I'd spent years dealing with her crazy rules, dodging her fines, and pushing back against her nonsense. And in the end, all it took was one over-the-top wedding and a little bit of nasty water to finally bring her down. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my legs out. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly relaxed. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Tom. HOA meeting tomorrow. Final vote on whether we're disbanding. Should be interesting. Bring popcorn. I grinned and shook my head. Oh, I'd be there. After everything I'd been through, there was no way I was missing that. As I put my phone down, I noticed something across the street. Karen's front door opened, and for the first time since the disaster, she stepped outside. She looked around carefully, like she was expecting someone to jump out at her. She was wearing big sunglasses, even though the sun was almost down, and she was holding her phone tight in one hand. She hurried to her car, looking around all nervous before getting in and starting the engine. I watched as she backed out of the driveway, her tires squealing a little as she sped off down the road. I didn't know where she was going, but I had a feeling it wasn't just a quick trip to the grocery store. I let out a breath and leaned back in my chair again. Maybe she was finally gone for good. I took another sip of my drink, looking up at the darkening sky. Peace at last. At least, until the next neighborhood disaster.